Well, I'm delighted to be serving as the moderator for this opening panel of the 2011 FAA Forecast Conference. Where do airlines go from here? What will the future airline industry look like? As aviation looks to the future, it is clear that the way business has been done in the past is simply not sustainable for the future. Faced with new and significant challenges, airlines are looking at changes at their business models that will enable them not only to survive, but to thrive in the future. We're thrilled to have an outstanding panel to start us off this morning to discuss these and some other issues impacting the aviation industry. First off, on my far left, Will Riss. Will is the Senior Vice President for Governmental Affairs with American Airlines. He's no stranger to inside Washington aviation policy debates. He's been with American, first as an outside counsel and then as a senior officer for 28 years. Scott Lawrence, next to Will, is a VP Network Planning, JetBlue Airways. He's had a long career in the airline business. Prior to joining JetBlue, Scott served in senior revenue management and financing positions with United Airlines and US Airways. Next to Scott is Ed Faberman, another Washington aviation veteran, serves as the executive director of the Air Carrier Association of America, which represents new entrant airlines, startup carriers, and small and medium-sized communities. He had a long, distinguished career with the FAA. And last but not least, Roger Cohen. Roger is the president of the Regional Airline Association. Prior to his service at RAA, Roger was in senior management positions at AOPA and ATA, and for those that have been around the industry a lot, he actually worked for TWA years ago. So let's get started. First, I'd like to throw it open to the panel members for a 1-minute sort of snapshot of where you see the airline industry as we sit here this morning. Roger, why don't we start with you? 1 minute, each of you.
All right, I'm on the clock. One could argue, Spence, that the regional industry now, our segment, really is the domestic industry. We're 52% of the flights, scheduled passenger flights, about 40% of the scheduled fleet, about 1 out of every 4 passengers on a regional airliner, and most importantly, 3/4 of the communities that have any scheduled service here in the United States have service only from regional airlines. We've also been going global. We've got transborder service right now, nonstop from about 30 US cities to 10 in Canada, from 10 US cities to about 50 in Mexico and the Caribbean. And I think the ultimate story about where we are today, the other day I went out to the OAG. I'm an old school guy, and I kind of counted up from the 3 Washington area airports, BWI, DCA, and ID, to the 4 New York airports, including White Plains. There's 35 nonstops going northbound from the first flight in the morning till about 9 in the morning. And would you believe that only 5 of those 35 flights are on mainline aircraft today? And most of those were on Southwest from BWI. So it's pretty significant that in the 2, at least self-described, most important communities in the country, the majority of the service there is on regional aircraft.
Ed, where do you see things stand right now, particularly from a new entrant carrier?
Well, I guess originally when I put material together for this, I was not seeing good things, but after I heard Nan's presentation, I think we're all ready to stand up and cheer. So thank you, Nan. You know, there's an old one-line joke that I occasionally use. It came from Mel Brooks many, many years ago. And Mel said, if God wanted us to fly, he would have given us all tickets. Well, that's what low-fare carriers try to do. We try to give everyone tickets that are affordable and can get out there. And yes, the industry continues to face unbelievable challenges. However, there's many of us that remember the challenges, and we got through them in the past. Besides TWA, we remember Pan Am, Braniff, Eastern, and others, and yes, we still operate and we still can fly around the country. We also remember the days when there was no such thing as airport security. You could just walk to your plane. You know, now we have airport security, and I think the system is safer. So I think the system has ability to expand and grow, but it's difficult to grow in lots of areas in this country.
Scott?
Well, I think you know, it's pretty clear that we're in a situation where I'd like to think that we've actually pre-disastered our industry. You know, we've had fuel, we've had recession, we've had other challenges. We're always going to have those things, and I think from a commercial perspective at JetBlue, you know, we look going forward. We're very concerned about you know, oil. We're concerned about the economy recovering. But I think there's two things that we're doing. One is, you know, we've got a strategic plan that we're sticking to. We're continuing to persevere through that, and that means, you know, growth in places like Boston and the Caribbean and Latin America. But the other piece of this is delivering value, and that's with our product, with our people. We're obviously very focused on that. And I think the other piece here is just long-term sustainability, making sure that we control our costs, making sure that we make decisions with regard to growth that we can live with in the long term.
Will?
Just to tee off on that, and I liked your one-liner, Ed. The other one-liner that is a cliche in our business, but is really true, is the best way, the easiest way to make a small fortune in the world is to start out with a large one and buy an airline. And that is, continues to be the case. I think we are in the middle, not in the middle, we are in a continuum of evolution that really began with deregulation and has accelerated. And in the very most basic terms, that evolution that we're seeing today is that the airlines are really struggling to become, you know, like the rest of business. We have been unique in so many different ways, and we continue to be unique. But there are lots of things that are happening now in the airline business, whether it's through consolidation, globalization, the way that we sell and distribute our product, that is making us actually look more like other companies. That is, in our business, devoutly to be hoped, because other companies actually make money. And that would be a wonderful thing to have happen. But I think as we enter into this conversation, and I suspect we'll talk about a bunch of stuff that's going on that people sometimes find frustrating, but there is one underlying factor that you have to continue to remember, and that is, you know, essentially in 9 of the last 10 years as an industry, we have lost money. Now, when you think of it, put it another way, that means that for most of the last decade, we have flown people where they want to go at less than it costs us to provide the service. That is a profoundly bad business model. If that continues for indefinitely, that is a model that is really tantamount to liquidation. We run out of assets eventually. And so we have to break that cycle, and we are breaking it in various different ways that we can talk about, and particularly with respect to how we're selling our product.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. You know, despite the operating profits that I think I saw the estimates in 2010 for the airlines in the U.S. would be about $7 billion. As you said, Will, the recent financial performance of this industry is just simply dismal. Still don't understand why any sane person would want to invest in this business, but nonetheless they do. You've had since 2011, I think the figure is, since 2001, $35 billion in losses collectively. And of course, since the Wright brothers started flying, there's been not a cent made in this industry. So the business model certainly has challenges. But we're starting to see a ray of hope. You've had in December last year was the 12th consecutive month of revenue growth. Fares and yields are rising a little bit. Certainly encouraging news. So let me start with you, Will. What have been the lessons learned from this past recession? It was devastating for the airlines. So what are the major lessons that particularly airlines like American learned from it?
Well, I think the lessons learned, I think Scott alluded to this, is that we have learned how to pace ourselves in a way that we're getting a little bit out of the traditional cycle that we've been in, which is invest you know, in incredible amounts in good times and then cut incredible amounts in bad times, and we need to level that off. But I think one of the things that you know, that still is on the horizon. We've tried to we've tried to reduce our costs across the board in every possible way we can. So we're flying more efficiently. We've asked for and received concessions from our employees, either voluntarily or through bankruptcy. We have done all sorts of stuff. There are a few areas that are out of our control. One of them is fuel, and that remains a huge worry. The spike in the last month due to the tensions in the Middle East has come down a little bit. We don't know how to project forward on that, and that's a very difficult thing. But beyond that, there are some issues that we can deal with, and the most fundamental thing is we have to sell our product at least what it costs us to produce or more. So we have to figure out how either cut our costs some more, which are very, very difficult to do because I think we are operating very lean, or get more revenue. And what we've obviously focused on is both, but the get more revenue seems to get a little bit more public attention.
Scott, JetBlue's grown a lot. What were the lessons JetBlue learned the last couple of years with the recession?
Well, I think, for us, when you look at us in sort of 2008 and 2009, we really didn't have growth. I mean, we were flat and taking aircraft. That was a big challenge for us. We'd always been a growth company. We managed our cost growth as we added more units. And so, for us, one of the lessons learned was developing, again, sustainability in what we're doing with the fleet plan. You look at JetBlue circa 2006, 2007, and there was just massive growth. It was, 16 cities opening in a year. We've really slowed that down and really applied our growth to parts of our company which previously weren't really core. So again, the Caribbean and Latin America. I think we found new geography. And a lot of what Will said is obviously very true for us. We've looked at ancillary. It's become a much bigger portion of our business in terms of generating revenue. And we've simply gotten smarter in terms of how we control costs and how we make decisions.
Ed?
Well, the airline industry in some ways is much different than other industries. I mean, if you own a store or you own things, you can go out and build a new store almost anywhere. The airline industry is not like that. I mean, if you want to grow in New York, it's difficult. If you want to grow in National Airport, it's almost impossible. So one of the problems you're facing is what are alternatives? And I think the good part of some of that is that I think some of the lower fare airlines are focusing now on some communities, some cities that no one would have thought would even be a mini hub. And you can expand and grow in those locations. I mean, Will's point about the price of fuel, I mean, I was looking at something yesterday, and Goldman Sachs is suggesting that, crude will be up to $100 in 2011 and maybe as high as 110 by the end of the year. I mean, and there's really nothing you can do on that. But there are other opportunities. I mean, as Scott said, I mean, I think who would have thought that you would have seen some of the low fare carriers go into the Caribbean, go into Latin America and other locations to give passengers more opportunities and more options to use them.
Roger, from the regional airlines, what did they collectively learn?
Well, I think our business model for our members is different. So just so everybody has a good understanding of it, virtually all of the flying that's done by regional airlines in the United States today is done in partnership with the mainline carriers. So the mainline carrier generally sets the ticket price. This is for the majority of things, sets the schedule. So the flip side of that, though, is that they're taking care of them in the majority of the costs, such as the volatility in fuel costs. So if you look at what's happened to the regional industry over the last decade, there was tremendous growth post 9/11 as a number of routes were shifted to regional flying. That has leveled off now, and we're at a period of stability. And now and our growth rate has flattened out. But I think as the aircraft and the companies as the companies consolidate, there's more stability there. I think the big question is going to be what's going to be in the next 5 years beyond that.
Roger, one thing I want to veer from script, because this came up on the news the last couple of nights, but it's been a couple years since the Colgan accident up in Buffalo. Significant changes heading toward the regional airlines with legislation last year. You work closely with the FAA on those rules, flight and duty times. Give us a snapshot of where that's heading, since it just was recently talked about again in the news.
I know, and it's a very significant date. Prior to the Colgan, prior to the 3407 accident, commercial aviation had gone the longest period of time in its history without an accident. We're very proud to say, everybody in this room should take credit, that we are now we're on the second longest period of time without a fatal accident in this country. And because of all of the improvements that every stakeholder has done, that we are in a much safer, better system now. And working, and as Nan pointed out, there's one level of safety for all commercial aviation in this country. And our members have been really at the forefront of putting a lot of those improvements and programs in place. The key now is to keep it up, and I think we're all geared towards that challenge.
Back to the business model question. You know, the saying in the industry, you know, airports look at planning, you know, 3, 4, 5 years down the road. Airlines look into planning in basically until next week, given the volatile nature of the business. Some of the business model changes that all four of you have talked about, are they sustainable for the future?
Oh, I certainly believe so. I mean, certainly I think carriers now are looking at other locations where they can fly, both domestically as connecting mini hubs or moderate size hubs, but also internationally. But they're also looking at, you know, and I think JetBlue's done a good example, and of course American has always, and that is relationships with other airlines to hook up with, so that you can connect with them, so that you can have relationships with them. And that's all important, because if I'm a frequent flyer and I can look at, you know, my airline, or someone's going to look at my airline and say, well, I now have more options where I can fly and I can use other benefits, I'm going to maybe take an additional trip or two this year that in the past perhaps I would not have taken.
Anybody else?
You know, I would say this. I think what we're doing right now is sustainable. We're going to have to continue to do more. The challenges are going to continue to be greater. I think we just need to assume that. And so whether it's something like alliances where, you know, I think when we announced that we were going to be working on feeding American and JFK and Boston, for example, I think that raised a lot of eyebrows. It was very interesting when you think back, you know, 8, 9 years ago, if you would have told people in this room that JetBlue and American would be cooperating on feed for long-haul flying, I think that they probably would have laughed us out of the room. I think there's got to be more creativity like that if we're going to have a sustainable model. And I think we take a very open mind to how we approach our business model. And again, I think that focuses on long-term sustainability.
And who would have thought that on that alliance, that JetBlue-American alliance, the third leg of that stool is probably our most unique, and one of our smaller carriers is Cape Air flies 9-seat airplanes, 9-seat airplanes, and connects to both of those carriers as part of that single alliance. That was unheard of before.
Well, I think it's sustainable. The answer is no, unless you are willing to continue to be flexible and you know, operate with the times. Here's to me, one of the best examples of how things have changed. The single most profitable airline, the single best business model in the industry is Southwest. And you would have said 3 years ago, is that sustainable? Absolutely. And then lo and behold, they decided that they were going to merge with AirTran. Now that is an extraordinary change in their business model. And I think when you see a company as savvy and as successful as Southwest taking a very significant turn, it just says if you're going to be sustainable, you can't keep doing what you're doing today. Even if it's working today, you have to keep looking in the future and try and figure out what the next step is and try and keep ahead of it. So a convoluted way of saying it's sustainable for a little bit, but we always have to keep moving.
But I just want to say that, you know, I think one of the reasons that every airline today has to look at partnerships, mergers, and other kinds of relationships is because we do have airports that are closed. We do have situations where, okay, well, we now completely serve, you know, the eastern part of the country. We serve the Midwest, but we don't have enough service from east to west. So you have to look at options. And in some cases, the only options you might have are getting involved in mergers or getting involved in other relationships. And I will say, the government has a responsibility. JetBlue would not be here today if the government had not done what it did in giving them really a large access at JFK, and that was the right thing to do then.
Will, you know, you look the last several years, American, you're sort of by yourself. United Continental merger, Delta Northwest, US Airways, America West. Where is American in all this with all your competitors merging?
I guess, oh no, sorry, but it must be something we're doing wrong. Yeah.
Or doing right, maybe.
Or doing right. Well, you know, that's a good question. I mean, we have obviously, it's no secret, we've looked over the years at different options. We decided for a variety of reasons that our best plan forward was to grow internally to the extent we can domestically and to seek international alliances. And I think we've sort of alluded to it, but I think one of the things that has changed dramatically in the last several years and is evolving even as we speak are the global alliances. And they are really on the leading edge of what I think the industry is going to be looking like 10 years from now, as people begin to try to put networks together, as Ed alluded to, that are far more comprehensive. And the global alliances are really important from a business point of view, not only just for providing great networks for people, but it really is focused on sort of the corporate customer, if you will. Corporate customers who really are the backbone of the revenue of most of the traditional carriers at any rate. They want access to the entire world increasingly. And this is amplified by the incredible telecommunications network that we have that ironically hasn't replaced air transportation. I think it's enhanced it by connecting people around the world who eventually need to meet each other somewhere. And so our strategy has been to try to put together a global network through One World Alliance, as well as seeking strategic partners like we have with JetBlue and others domestically to enhance this network, and it seems to be paying off.
I know it's hard to sort of predict the future. I mean, if we were sitting here a year ago today and somebody predicted that a volcano in Iceland would shut down European travel in the spring of last year, like 9/11 shut down air travel in the United States, you'd say you were crazy, you needed a drug test. But it happened, so it's hard to sort of foresee the future. But what keeps you up at night? What keeps the senior airline people up at night in terms of looking at 2011? Obviously, we talked a little bit about fuel spiking. Doesn't look like we're going to be heading into a double-dip recession. But what else keeps you up at night when you look at how we sustain some of the growth that we've been seeing in the last few months? Roger, you want to?
Well, I think, as a veteran of the airline business, it's always going to be something. It's some disease that no one's ever heard of. I mean, who had ever heard of SARS before it shut down the system? So I'm always kind of a pessimist, thinking that there's going to be something out there. But I think that the thing that keeps our people up at night, obviously some of the economic things, but really the workforce going forward is, are we going to have enough trained aviation professionals to do a number of jobs? Right now we have a mechanic shortage, and that's globally. I think that's only going to get worse. Obviously, trained pilots and aviation professionals of all kind. We've beat this industry down so bad and made it seem so bad that it's hard attracting young people into it again. And I think that's the challenge that keeps a lot of people up.
Ed, from the new entrant, low-fare carrier? What are your members stay up at night worrying about?
Well, we're worried about a number of things, but as you agreed this morning, there will be no increase in PFCs. I think that'll make it easier for us to all sleep. I think it continues to be congestion. I mean, you can't plan weather. It's an issue, it's a problem, but you can't worry about that. But it's congestion. You know, are we going to see more closed airspace? Are we going to see other areas that now are going to be difficult to get in and out of? But I also think that even though we're comfortable with the security system we have out there, obviously the last thing any of us want to see is even a minor security issue that gets, you know, attention right up front. So it's the day-to-day things that I think concern us the most, and the ability to continue to grow and do the right things. But as I think we all mentioned before, you know, fuel continues to be on a high part of that list.
Scott?
Well, I will tell you, it's not one or two things. I worry about everything all the time. It's quite unpleasant, actually. But you know, I think one of the things that we do is we anticipate problems and put a plan together. We've got a plan on the shelf for $120 oil. We have a plan on the shelf if demand falls back down. You know, again, I think putting those plans together, and you know, it's not often that those plans actually survive what actually happens, but it gives us a framework to work with. Also, having those plans allows us to sort of adjust and move forward and have an idea of what we're going to do. So you can't plan for everything. I'm finding very quickly that you can worry about everything. But you know, I think the other piece here is, you know, all of these potential problems are also opportunities, and I think we're somewhat positive about that. And you know, whether it's an oil spike, you know, that affects us and impacts us. It also impacts our competitors. So I think the other piece of this is making sure that any crisis that we come through, that we use it to our advantage. You know, we are very competitive. That nothing makes us happier than kicking a competitor in the shin. And sometimes when they're down, you know, it's what we do.
Can we quote you on that?
Yeah. No one would be surprised.
Will?
Well, I'm with Scott. We worry about everything, including worrying about the things that Scott is worrying about that we don't know about that we should be worrying about. So it's really hard. I think in terms of what keeps you up at night, those are the things that you have very little control over. And I would just separate our world, and I suppose everybody's lives are sort of like this. The things that are out of control, you know, sort of I would call a situation. You can't really fix it. You just have to deal with it. The things that are in control are problems. You can fix problems. So if you have a problem with your labor union, that's a problem. That's fixable. If you have a decision on whether to buy a certain, you know, airplane or not, that's a problem. You can do that. The thing that makes you worried at night are the things that you have no control over. And we've alluded to them, but the three big things are fuel prices, the general economy, and any acts of terrorism. Those are things that are out of our control, and those are situations that you have to end up dealing with, but those are the ones that, since you have no control over them, you actually lose more sleep over.
Well, I wasn't going to raise PFCs, but Ed, since you did, I'll throw out a PFC question. The airlines over the years have done a good job of painting PFCs as a federal tax, and it's farthest from the truth, of course. It's a local fee, locally decided with consultation with the airlines, and in many cases for your hub airports, the PFC keeps rates and charges off the balance sheet. It helps develop capacity. So American may love a PFC at one of its hubs, but not at United's hub, and vice versa. Why is it such a visceral reaction from the airlines on PFCs? Because the airlines are the ones that, at the end of the day, benefit from it, from capacity and development, particularly at the hub airports. Anybody want to jump in on that?
You know, I'll take off my RAA hat here for a minute, though, because I've been one of the warriors on this PFC battle, and I began to think about this last night. And I think a lot of it goes back to the inception and And sometimes old myths die hard. And so there may have been some airports back 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that either misused them, overbuilt, and these became almost poster children that kind of generated an equal reaction from the airline community. And then those perceptions are hard to live down, whether you're an airport, whether you're an airline, whether you're an industry. And I think that that's probably been one of the things that's been the cause of some of this continual infighting about this, because I think the point you brought up is good. There's been a lot of great projects that have been done with PFCs, and think about all the time we were spending when it took so long to get a runway built, and how we were trying to get investment in this industry. And then we have, then we have 9/11. I mean, that was one day. We need more investment, then the bottom falls out of the industry. So matching up all those different dynamics has been very difficult.
Plus, I will say that I agree that in some airports, in some cases, PFCs have resulted in very positive things, improving airports, maybe adding capacity. But it's not the only way that airports have funding to do those things. And, in some airports, want to increase rents, want to do other things. There are other charges they have out there they want to impose, and particularly for a smaller carrier that may only have 6 or 7 operations at an airport. And then on top of that, you go from a $4.50 PFC to a $7 PFC. And it's an industry where even if 1% of your passengers will cut back on their flying, it has a big impact. And I think that's the concern. I mean, if we could sit down and all close our eyes and say, by the end of 2011, 2012, here is was going to be the price of fuel, here's going to be what your lease rates are going to be, and here's what your PFCs and other things are going to be, and we could settle on them and freeze them, that might be a different story. But unfortunately, all those things continue to change.
I would say this. I looked at a Wall Street report, I think yesterday, that noted that there's an impact here, and I think that's part of it. A 1 or 2% change in industry unit revenue can make a big difference. These small things, and in the end, we're working on the margin. The difference between a good year and a bad year is all on a very narrow margin. So I think anything that changes that, we're obviously very concerned with.
And Spence, I think there's a couple things here. One, if you just look at PFCs isolated, I mean, obviously, clearly, as these other guys have said, they have been very beneficial. The problem that we've got is that there are 17 unique taxes and fees that the federal government imposes on the airline industry. 17 that are imposed on no other industry, okay? So it's the cumulative effect. An average ticket price of $300 has taxes and fees of $61 that are taken out of that. So the passenger thinks they're giving us $300. In essence, they're really giving us $240, okay? Because the rest goes somewhere else. And so the issue on PFCs is just, this is added on to an enormous amount of money that is already on the ticket. So that's one of the things. I would turn it back to you. I would ask you. I don't understand this. Over the years, the airports have come in and said, we want either unlimited PFCs or we want substantially higher PFCs, but never having offered, what to me made the most sense in the world, and said, okay, any increase would require the approval of the majority of the carriers at the airport for whatever project is going to be approved. And most of the time that would have happened, and yet for some reason, the airports just wanted it without any strings attached. I think it may have been a miscalculation, and I think that the political climate has changed a lot. I may be wrong, but I think maybe a PFC increase could have happened if somehow the airports had been willing to make that a relatively small concession.
Well, I think it comes down to a control issue. It's all about the control of that money, and I think the airports want to maintain that ability to control it. But it'll continue to be a debate that'll go on, started with the
Well-
Wright brothers, and it'll go on for...
You can control $4.50 as opposed to cooperate on $7.
Ancillary revenues, Nan mentioned a little bit, continues to be a hot topic. I think the figure is $8 billion collected by the airlines in ancillary revenues in 2010, $3 billion of which was bag fees. Now, before all you started these separate fees, that was part of the base fee and was subject to the federal ticket tax. Now that you've broken those out, those aren't subject to the federal ticket tax, so it's had an impact on the Aviation Trust Fund. Is that fair when you look at, because so much of FAA's operations and capital budget comes from ticket tax revenue, is that fair to the industry?
Yeah, sure, it's fair to the industry. The ticket tax is based on the use of the system, the amount of infrastructure that is being used. That's sort of a, the best way that the Congress has figured out how to do this. Carrying, a bag, charging for a bag, charging for a pillow, something like that, has absolutely no impact on the federal government investment in air transportation, and therefore there's no reason whatsoever if you buy a sandwich in the airport as opposed to buying a sandwich on the airplane, that should be taxed any differently. And so it seems to me that you tax the basic service, which is using the infrastructure provided by the federal government, and convey that tax to the government to pay for it, and everything else should not be subject to that.
But all those fees were part of the
They
base
were
ticket, weren't they?
they were not. They were added on to the base ticket. They weren't. We didn't lower prices. We added these on. And why did we add these on? I repeat, we weren't making enough money to pay the bills, so we had to figure out some other way of doing it. So it's not that we have taken apart the fee structure and radically lowered the base fares. That is not what's happened. And the base fares continue to be subject to the taxes.
You also want to comment on the ancillary fees? It's been continues to be very controversial.
I do think that there's another piece of this too, which is, I'll give you an example. We have a section of our aircraft we call even more legroom, where we've got 38 inches of pitch. Well, in order to fund that, we took 2 rows of seats off the airplane. We have a business decision to make about that, but we've also invested in it. So, that's not something that would have normally been part of the ticket previously. It's a value add. I think when we look at ancillary, one of the things we're trying to do is add value to what the customer experience might be. So if you want to pay for more legroom, listen, we took out seats to do that. And we're incurring a cost to do that. So this is not something, it's not a take. It's the potential to make a choice and have a customer make that choice.
And I think it's important to note too is that we've become much more, as Will said, like other industries, and it's added a whole nother layer of competition within this consolidated industry, because there are some carriers that do charge fees, some don't charge, some will have a better deal on internet or whatever it might be, and that's another choice that each consumer is going to make, which is another form of competition, which is what Congress intended.
It's really not that much different than lots of other industries. I mean, if you stay at a hotel, if you go to a movie theater, if you go to a restaurant, there are certain things you can just get in, and then there are other things you'll pay extra for if you want to have stay on a different floor, if you want to do this, if you want to do that. So to me, it's a customer's option. And to a lot of business travelers in particular who may not carry as much luggage or something, why should that be part of my basic fare? If someone wants to do that, then that's fine. I mean, they have other options. They can ship it other ways. But I think it's the right approach right now.
Spencer, can I just add one other thing to that? This has been bugging me lately, because for years we have been criticized by people saying, oh, you've become a commodity. You're all alike. You can't tell the difference between one or another. Now we're trying to become different from one another. We're trying to offer different things. You go to Spirit and you pay for everything, and they're proud of that, and that's great. And they have a product that they're happy to sell, that they're proud to sell. that is very, very different than what JetBlue is selling or that what American is or anybody else is selling. And that's actually, you know, as Ed said, that's a really good thing. That's not a bad thing. That's the way the rest of the world works. And we are just think about when you buy a computer from Dell, you go and say, okay, I want a basic computer. And then your question is, do you want anything more? Do you want a little bit more power? Do you want, you know, different kinds of products, and you build it up? That's all we're doing. It's the same with a rental car. You go to online and you say, I want to rent a car in Denver, and they say, fine, from $26. You have, do you want a little small car? Do you want a big car? Do you want a GPS? Do you want to prepay fuel? Do you want a ski rack? Do you want a whatever? That's the way business works, and that's the direction we're heading. And it's often frustrating for consumers because it does, sometimes choices are, you know, frustrating, but it really does help us differentiate our product. And I think we're moving in exactly the right direction.
And as Roger said, some airlines like Southwest will not charge or don't charge. So, I mean, I think as a consumer, you have an option. You can look, I can go this way, that way, and that's your choice.
President Obama mentioned in the State of the Union, leaders on the Hill have mentioned it. They want to hear from the industries, U.S. industries, about unfair and burdensome regulations that are placed on you. What are some of the top regulations that you'd like to see scaled back or rolled back completely now that there seems to be some reception in Washington by both Democrats and Republicans to take a look at that and the burden it has on businesses? Anybody want to start?
You know, I think as opposed to picking out a specific regulation, I think everybody, I know from our members, what we're really seeking is consistency of regulation, particularly with the primary regulatory agencies, the FAA, TSA, that tell us what the rules are, let us know, but apply them consistently so that an individual in one region or the way something's done in New York is different than it is in Dallas or it's done some other way. And I think that's what, because when you're running a system-wide network global business, what you want is some certainty and consistency in regulation as opposed to, well, it's this regulation or that regulation. Airlines have been the greatest of any industry of being safe, of being responsive, of being all of those things. We are at the height of any industry, put it up against anybody else. But what really frustrates, I think, any airline executive is if it's applied inconsistently, arbitrarily. That's what we're looking for, consistency.
Ed?
Well, I think some of the economic restrictions, including the high density rule, I mean, some of those regulations have been around forever. And I will tell you, and please don't all stand up and say, boy, is he old, but when I was at the FAA in the early 70s, I was asked to look at the high density rule, and I was told, oh no, that's only going to be a temporary rule. And of course, you know, 40 years later, it's still here. But so I think anything that restricts marketplace competition, that slows down ability to grow, expand, I think it has to be looked at. But I think it's important that the government review regulations. I'm not saying get rid of them or change them necessarily, but I also think it's important, you know, to look at them and not say, oh no, we have to, you know, dramatically change flight and duty time. You know, again, I remember when I worked on that at the FAA, you know, oh, we have pilots who are coming all the way to New York to travel. Yet, yes, in those days, if you worked for Pan Am, you might live in the Caribbean and fly in first class up to New York to fly. That was extremely relaxing, more so than if you lived in Providence and had to drive to New York. So, I mean, I think all these things have to be looked at and reevaluated periodically. I'm not saying that you must change them, but you have to reevaluate them.
Scott?
You know, I would go back to the issue of actually taxation. I think, you know, I would point out, we're not tobacco. You know, we're not selling alcohol. There's, you know, it is almost, when we talk about, you know, a $300 ticket, and, you know, we see $240 of that. You know, I don't think it goes back to regulation as much as it is that tax burden. And when, again, we're working on the margin, I think that is a big issue for us, and I think that it is an impediment to success, and I think that it's something that, again, we feel passionately about.
I don't have much
No,
to add.
no regulatory burdens you want to see.
No. There's some, I just think, I just would echo, I don't mean to be redundant, but I think, you know, one of the things that is really important is that what we do is it's sort of thoughtful and scientifically based, and I refer, you know, to a pending rulemaking on which we, you know, the industry has been, you know, very, very forthcoming in our concerns about, and that's flight and duty time. We are as concerned as any entity about the safety of the airlines, about making sure that flight crew are not fatigued. But we really need to base this on, you know, good science. And Roger mentioned before the increasing difficulty in hiring people. We are making that we're going to exacerbate that. It may or may not be the right thing to do, but we need to be really, really smart about it. But the other part is about the enforcement of regulations. And I think the fundamental fact in aviation, and probably a lot of other places, but certainly in aviation, is the single greatest benefit to safety is information. You need information. You need to know what's gone wrong in order to you know, prepare for what's going to happen ahead. And if you have an enforcement environment in which there are penalties or perceived penalties for disclosing information, that is actually counter to safety. If something bad happens and then all of a sudden huge fines are issued, I'm not sure that that's actually pro-safety. What's most important is that we create a regulatory and an enforcement environment that encourages people to share information, even if it's sort of painful information, even if it's about things that have gone wrong, but do it in a way that will allow us to learn from past mistakes so that we can prevent catastrophes in the future.
The tremendous improvements in safety for this industry, if you look at that line and how the accident level has gone down, the fatality level has gone down to essentially almost zero, you'll see that line is also tracked by the expansion of voluntary disclosure programs, where everybody in this industry can come forward and say, hey, you know, I see something that's not right, I did something that's not right, so that we can learn from it, so that we share. That's how the improvements have been made. And if we somehow cut that off, that's when the problem's going to arise.
Let's move to another hot topic in the industry, next gen. Scott, I'll start with you because you just had the announcement with FAA last week, $4.2 million over the next 2 years to equip 30, 35 JetBlue aircraft. Problem is, when the numbers I've seen, the collective costs for the air carriers and GA is in the $12 billion range. So your announcement was $4 million. So we've got quite a few zeros left to find. Now it looks like next gen will take a hit in the fiscal 2011 budget. It's currently being debated. Could possibly take a hit in the fiscal year 12, given the extraordinary pressures in Washington to reduce federal spending. We're all seeing that. So what is the future of next gen? I mean, equipping the airplanes is critical. How do we get from point A to point B? You can have everything on the ground, but if the planes aren't equipped, it's not going to do much good.
Well, I would say this, you know, today we're getting from point A to point B by going to points E, F, G, H. You know, I think about going back and forth from Washington to New York, and that can be a very easy trip that takes 30 minutes, or it can be a nightmare, or it can be on a train. You know, it is clear that we need a solution going forward. It is clear that the Northeast is obviously the hot point for that, and obviously something that we're very concerned with. And I think, you know, as we go forward, when you look at A, the potential savings that are there, and B, the potential for investment in other modes of transportation, so high-speed rail is a good example. You know, I think that we have a solution here that actually can make a lot more sense than taking the train and utilizing all of the airspace. So I think it's a very wise investment. It is a big investment, but I also I think it's something that we believe can work. And the other piece is that it's a reason why we've been on the forefront of that. We're going to hear later today from Joe Pertipelli from JetBlue as well, who's going to talk in more detail about this. But again, I think when you look at the airspace in which we operate, it's just it frustrates customers. I think that just the concept that says, hey, listen, let's take the train because it's easier to get from Washington to New York, just doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
You can take the bus right across the street, Megabus, $1, right across the street.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Will, you've been around this town a long time. I mean, everybody agrees next-gen is the way to, in your intro you said since the Wright brothers, but not quite.
Right, right.
But next-gen, everybody agrees, is the way to go. I mean, geez, we should have aircraft equipped like our cars are equipped. But the budget realities in Washington are it's not going to come from the federal government to equip the airplanes. The budgets are going to reduce the on-ground equipment. I mean, how do we get there?
Okay. That's a very good question. And so let me just step back. And I'll tell you how we think we should get there, and it's not working. So but I'll give you the argument at any rate. We have an air traffic control system today that is largely ground-based. We interrogate the airplanes, but basically it's radar-based, it's ground-based, radio-based, and so on. All we're doing when we're talking about next gen, we're taking a known technology, GPS technology, and we're moving part of the equipment in the air and part of the equipment will be on the ground. So we're taking an air traffic control system, we're just rearranging it. It is our view that air traffic control system should continue to be financed and supported by the federal government because that's, after all, where all the ticket taxes are going, and that's the format that we've had for all these years, and we're just changing the location of some of the equipment. So that's the going-in position, and that is not a position that anybody is saluting particularly, because that would mean that the federal government would be paying for equipage in the airplanes, but that would be what we think would be the right public policy. In the absence of that, you have to say, okay, you can do one of two things. You can either just simply mandate that the aircraft has to be equipped with equipment by a certain date in order to get the system going, and that is a distinct possibility. The problem with mandating it is first you have to have the standards set, and we don't have those set yet, so that people can know what they need to put in the airplanes, and we need some assurance that those standards won't be changed over time. Or you can create some kind of creative financing, and the best analogy I can use, and I think it's the simplest, but it's also the most realistic, is to say, look, think of it like a toll road. Users ultimately pay for the toll road, but they don't start paying for the toll road until it opens up. You can't charge a toll unless somebody's driving on the toll road. So let's figure out a system where we could front-end finance the equipage at a point of time when the equipage isn't being used, and then begin charging for it at a time when the equipment is being used, and you get the value out of the system. And so that implies the possibility of a couple proposals around about creating a public-private partnerships or private partnerships or whatever to fund some of this in advance, and then not have to pay for it until the system works. And if the system isn't turned on and doesn't work, then we shouldn't have to pay for it.
I just want to say that if you look at what the White House issued yesterday on the federal budget, they're going to invest. The administration's reauthorization provides $53 billion over 6 years to continue construction of a national high-speed and intercity passenger rail network. And I think that's a good investment, but let's take some of that and put it into NextGen, and because they're talking about some of the same things. It'll connect communities, reduce travel times and congestion. Well, yes, we can put some money from the federal budget into NextGen and do some of the exactly same things.
High-speed aviation. I mean, in 1953, American Airlines had service between Boston and New York that was scheduled for 57 minutes. We have that service today that's scheduled for an hour and 30 minutes, okay? That means that with new jets, with new equipment and everything, we now have 50% longer flights. We need high-speed aviation as well as high-speed rail.
Well said. We're almost out of time, so we got 1 minute left. I'm going to ask a quick question of you guys. and then we'll move on to the next session. FAA reauthorization. Talk about Groundhog Day. 17 extensions since the bill expired in 2007. It's on the Senate floor this week again. Chairman Mica of the Transportation Committee in the House has introduced his bills. Markup in committee is tomorrow. Quick answer, will we see a long-term FAA reauthorization bill passed and signed by the President this year? And if so, what is the single biggest hurdle that Congress has to get over to get that done? Roger, quick answer.
I'm a betting man. The answer is yes. The better question and the tougher bet is the over-under on when. And I'm betting that it won't happen by March 15th.
What's the biggest hurdle?
Typical congressional Washington inertia.
Ed?
I would say by the end of the year. I don't think it's going to happen soon, and I think that there's still some significant disagreements. And you know, no surprise. I mean, there are 4 different proposals concerning flights at a national airport, and those things have held up this bill in the past. Things like that, and obviously PFCs, except you've agreed that you're going to withdraw that, so thank you.
Scott, you want to take you're not in Washington, you want to take a crack at that?
I will give you my favorite answer, which is I don't know.
Will, you get the last word. Long-term bill, and if so, what's the biggest hurdle that needs to get resolved?
Okay, the truth is I don't know either, but I will give you an answer. And the answer is yes, there will be a long-term bill. We may have to go one more short-term extension. I think it'll happen sooner than later. The biggest hurdle is any number of items such as DCA slots that could become the tail wagging the dog, but I think that it's going to happen.
Great. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. Please give our panel a round of applause.